Carl's hand lingered on Sarah's lower back, a slow, deliberate trace as he guided her through the crowded company banquet hall. He smiled past her at me, his eyes cold and knowing. The hum of conversation faded around us, leaving me exposed, a bystander to a claim I knew he was making. "Some things," Carl said, his voice a low rumble, "are just too good to stay married." "My name is Frank. I worked a steady job in IT, the kind of work that paid the bills and kept the mind sharp, but never really stirred the blood. For nearly 9 years, I'd been married to Sarah. We lived in a decent split level out on the edge of town, a quiet suburban street where the lawns were always cut and the trash cans went out on Tuesday nights. Our routine was predictable, comfortable even. We were saving, putting away a solid chunk of every paycheck into an account marked future home and another smaller one for kids. That was the plan anyway. Bigger house, a couple of kids, maybe a dog. It felt like a good life, a quiet one built on solid ground. Sarah, she had a different kind of energy. She was a real estate agent for Paramount Properties, had been since she was 23. She'd always been good at it, a natural, with a way of talking to people that made them trust her, even when the numbers weren't in their favor. Brenda, her old boss, always said Sarah was the best she'd ever had. Sarah used to come home buzzing, full of stories about open houses and closing deals. Her smile could light up the whole kitchen. Then Carl Jenkins came on board. He arrived in late spring, brought in as the new sales director. Carl was a tall man, smooth talker, always perfectly dressed. He had a way of leaning in as if sharing a secret, even when he was just asking for coffee. People at the office seemed to like him, drawn to his charisma. I met him a few times at company events. He shook my hand firm, looked me in the eye, and complimented Sarah. But there was always something in his gaze that made the hairs on my neck stand up. He was slick, unsettling, like a shadow moving just at the edge of your vision. The change in Sarah wasn't sudden. It was like watching a color slowly fade from a photograph. Her vibrant energy dimmed. The stories from work stopped, replaced by monosyllabic answers. She started taking longer showers, sometimes twice a day. The sound of the water running a low hum behind our bedroom door, long after she'd claimed she was just freshening up. Our Friday night date nights, once a sacred ritual of pizza and a rented movie, began to be too much effort, or, "I'm just tired, Frank." I'd wake up some nights and find her staring at the ceiling, the streetlights outside casting long, familiar shadows across her face. Her breathing would be shallow, her body rigid beside me. I'd ask if she was okay, and she'd just murmur, "Fine, just thinking." The company Christmas party was held at the Marriott Ballroom downtown, all sparkling lights and forced cheer. Sarah had insisted we go, though she'd spent an hour picking out a dress, then another 20 minutes just standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the straps, looking at herself with an unfamiliar, critical eye. Once we were there, she clung to my hand, her grip tight, almost painful whenever Carl Jenkins moved into her line of sight. He worked the room like a politician, a practiced smile for everyone. But his eyes, I noticed, kept drifting back to Sarah. I could feel her tense up, a subtle shudder running through her when he was near. Then Carl was standing in front of us. He offered a wide smile, a glass of champagne in his hand. "Frank, good to see you again," he said, his voice deep and smooth. He didn't wait for me to respond. His gaze flicked to Sarah, then back to me, lingering for a moment too long. "Sarah here. She's a real asset to Paramount. A sharp mind. You're a lucky man, Frank. A very lucky man. Almost a shame she's married, isn't it?" He laughed, a low, confident sound, as if he'd just delivered a harmless joke. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened even more, her knuckles white. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. The Christmas music on the radio felt intrusive, saccharine. I could feel the tension radiating off Sarah in waves. I pulled into our driveway, killed the engine, and the silence pressed in. "What was that about?" I asked, my voice calm, almost flat, but I could feel the tremor beneath it. "With Carl and you." Sarah said nothing, just stared out the windshield at the garage door. "You've been different, Sarah, for weeks, and tonight with him, you were terrified." That's when she broke. The dam gave way without warning. She started crying, quiet at first, then racking sobs that shook her whole frame. He, he started small, Frank, just comments about my clothes, about how I looked. Then it was about my sales numbers, about my career. He said if I wasn't cooperative, things could get difficult for me. He implied I could lose everything, my job, my reputation. She pulled a tissue from the glove compartment, dabbing at her eyes. I tried to go to HR, but Brenda said Carl practically hired their new head of department. They're useless. They just told me to try and work it out. He's got them all wrapped around his finger. I can't lose this job, Frank, not now. Her voice was a ragged whisper, full of desperation. A cold fury settled in my chest, a heavy dead weight. It wasn't the kind of anger that exploded. It was the kind that froze, hardening everything inside. I reached across the console, pulling her into my arms. Her body felt small, fragile. We'll face it, I said, my voice low and steady, a promise I intended to keep. Whatever it is, we face it together. She just clung to me, her tears damp against my shoulder. That night, I lay awake long after Sarah had finally drifted off, her breathing shallow beside me. The suburban streetlights cast their familiar glow through the bedroom window. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen sounded unnaturally loud. My mind churned, dark thoughts circling like vultures. Carl Jenkins, his words, her fear. My quiet life had been shattered piece by piece, and I knew with a chilling certainty that it was never going to be the same again. A hard, cold resolve began to set in, pushing out the fear and uncertainty. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I couldn't let it stand. Over coffee and toast the next morning, the kitchen light felt harsh, exposing the faint shadows under Sarah's eyes. We spread out the problem between us like a complicated map. We need proof, I said, my voice steady, though my stomach churned. Recordings, texts, a journal, every date, every word he says, every time he looks at you the wrong way. It sounded simple enough when I laid it out, a logical, almost technical solution to an ugly problem. Sarah just stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. "He's not stupid, Frank," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her mug. "Carl doesn't say anything outright. Not ever. He implies. He suggests. He corners you where there are no witnesses. He'll compliment my dedication while his hand brushes my lower back, or talk about growth opportunities in a hotel bar instead of the office. He's careful. He knows the rules." Her voice was flat, devoid of the usual morning brightness. The weeks that followed settled over our house like a persistent Midwestern fog. Sarah became a ghost of herself. She was jumpy, flinching at sudden noises, her shoulders perpetually hunched. Her clothes, once a perfect fit, seemed to hang on her. I noticed the sharp lines of her collarbones more often. Sleep offered little respite. She'd thrash in her sleep, small whimpers escaping her lips, waking us both. Sometimes she'd wake up bolt upright, breathing hard, the residue of a nightmare clinging to her. "Just work," she'd whisper when I asked, turning away to stare at the wall. There were mornings she'd sit at the edge of the bed, her uniform laid out, and I could see the battle playing out behind her eyes. "I could just quit," she'd say, the words barely audible, but then a stubborn glint would appear. "No, why should I? This is my career. I built this. I won't let him win." It was a relief to hear that steel in her voice, a flicker of the old Sarah. But it also filled me with a deeper dread, watching her fight, seeing what it was costing her. My pride in her strength was a bitter companion to the worry that gnawed at me. She was strong, yes, but she was also slowly disappearing. Our social life, never expansive, dwindled to nothing. We stopped seeing friends, stopped going to the occasional movie. Every evening was spent in a grim survival mode. Dinner was quiet, often eaten in front of the television, the noise of balm against the silence. We talked about work, but only in hushed, coded terms. Our world had shrunk to the walls of our house and the battle Sarah was fighting at Paramount. We were just getting through each day, marking time until the next assault, hoping for a breakthrough that never seemed to come. Sarah carried a small digital recorder in her purse, a tiny device no bigger than her thumb. She tried to activate it subtly during her interactions with Carl. She started a journal, a small black notebook kept hidden in her nightstand, where she meticulously documented every encounter, every glance, every suggestive word. He asked me to review Q3 projections in his office. Door closed after everyone else left. She'd write, her hand steady, but her jaw tight. Said my blouse was a distraction. July 14th, 6:15 p.m. Or meeting moved to the grill bar, 7 p.m. Said he needed my input on strategy. Kept touching my arm when he talked. July 21st. But Carl was too practiced. The recordings were mostly office chatter, background noise. When he spoke to Sarah, he kept his voice low, his words ambiguous. He'd corner her in the copy room, yes, but he'd be discussing a spreadsheet, his body just a little too close, his gaze a little too long. He'd change a meeting to a hotel bar, but he'd talk about sales figures and company politics, making sure to order her a non-alcoholic drink. The lingering touches, a hand on her shoulder when he passed, a brush of his arm against hers in a narrow hallway, were always brief, easily dismissed as accidental. They were small things, as Sarah called them, things that could be explained away, chalked up to office casualness. But cumulatively, they were a poison, steadily eroding her spirit, chipping away at her confidence, making her doubt her own perceptions. I watched her, night after night, as she wrote in her journal, her brow furrowed in concentration. The evidence was there in her words, in her fear, in her increasingly fragile state. But it wasn't the kind of evidence a lawyer would want. It was anecdotal, circumstantial, easily countered by a man as smooth and practiced as Carl Jenkins. He was too shrewd, I realized. Our plan, my logical, technical plan, was failing. He moved in the shadows, leaving no clear footprint, only the chilling feeling of his presence. The pressure built, a silent, oppressive weight. It pressed down on our quiet suburban home, seeping into the walls, into the very air we breathed. It was in Sarah's vacant stares, in the forced smiles we exchanged, in the hushed tones of our conversations. Our world was no longer about saving for a bigger house or future children. It was about surviving Carl Jenkins. One Tuesday evening, the hum of the television filling the living room with the drone of a cooking show, Sarah's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up, her thumb swiping across the screen. I glanced over, catching the faint glow on her face. Then as she read whatever appeared, the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin stark white, almost translucent in the dim light. Her jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in her cheek. "What is it?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The cooking show's cheerful host chattered on about bechamel sauce. Sarah didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, wide and hollow. "Sarah, what did he say?" I pressed. Slowly, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it, she held out the phone to me. I took it, the cold glass of the screen a stark contrast to the sudden heat in my chest. The message was from Carl. "Looking good today, Sarah. That skirt was quite distracting during the meeting. Maybe next time we can discuss your performance review somewhere more private. The Westbrook Hotel has excellent room service." I felt it then, a primal rage, cold and hard, blooming in my gut. It was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest, a sudden urge to hit something, to smash. I jumped up from the couch, nearly knocking over my half-empty beer. "There," I practically yelled, pacing in front of the television, the cooking show still flickering on unnoticed. "There it is. This is it, Sarah. This is evidence, black and white, right there. Harassment, plain as day." Sarah, still seated, didn't move. She looked small, shrunken. "It's not, Frank," she said, her voice barely a whisper, empty of all fight. "It's suggestive, yes, but it's not explicit. He can say he was complimenting my attire and offering a private setting for a sensitive performance review, implying discretion, not what we know he means. The Westbrook Hotel? Just a convenient location. Room service? Just a detail. He's careful. Always. He'll deny everything, twist it around. They'll believe him. They always do." Her gaze was fixed on the carpet, utterly defeated. I stopped pacing, the rage slowly draining out of me, replaced by a chilling certainty. She was right. He would twist it. He was that cunning. I walked to the window, staring out at our quiet suburban street, the neatly trimmed lawns, the identical houses. The fight had left her, finally, irrevocably. And with that, I knew this path, our path of gathering evidence, of playing by the rules, was a dead end. It would only break her further. A deep, cold certainty settled over me then, solid and unyielding. It was the kind of certainty that comes when all other options have been exhausted, when logic has failed, and something raw and primitive takes over. I knew with absolute clarity what I had to do. I turned from the window. I need to go to the hardware store, I said, my voice calm, almost detached. For a project. A project around the house. You know how things pile up. It was a lie, a thin one, but she just nodded, her eyes still distant. I went out to the garage, the familiar smell of oil and old wood filling my nostrils. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. In the corner, behind a stack of old tires, I found it. My old aluminum baseball bat, a relic from high school. It was scuffed and marked, but its weight was familiar, comforting, in my hands. The grip felt solid, worn smooth from years of use. I grabbed a rag from the workbench and methodically began to wipe down the bat, not that it needed it. The dull gleam of the aluminum caught the light. My reflection stared back from the polished surface, a stranger with hard eyes and a set jaw. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I was past anger. I was simply going to solve the problem. I walked out to my F-150, opened the back door, and slid the bat under the rear seat, pushing it forward until it was out of sight. The heavy thud of the door closing echoed in the quiet evening. The quiet man, the steady-eyed professional, the one saving for a bigger house and future kids, was gone. He had been replaced by something else entirely. A husband who had reached his limit. I parked my F-150 near the Paramount Properties office building, tucked into the darkest corner of the lot, far from the single security light. It was an old lot, mostly empty at this hour, shadows pooling under the skeletal trees. The October night was cold, still. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat, a steady, insistent thud against your ribs. Hours passed. Each minute felt like 10, stretching out, weighted by the chill and the silence. I pulled out my phone, reading Carl's text again, the glowing screen illuminating the words, burning them into my mind. That skirt was quite distracting, somewhere more private. Westbrook Hotel. Each word was a fresh spark, stoking the embers of the cold fire inside me. The lot remained empty. I watched the clock on my dash, the digital numbers ticking over. 10:30, 11, 11:45. Just as I was starting to think he wasn't coming in, that maybe he'd gone straight home. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness. A sleek black BMW, the kind Carl drove, pulled out slowly into the lot. It rolled past my truck, oblivious, and parked under the closest security light, a beacon in the otherwise dim expanse. Carl Jenkins got out. He was wearing a dark suit, his tie loosened, a briefcase in one hand. He walked towards the office entrance, his keys jingling softly as he pulled them from his pocket. He was humming a low tune, entirely absorbed in his own world, utterly unaware of the shadow watching him. I opened my truck door, the sound a sharp rasp in the silence. Carl froze, his hand still on the doorknob. He turned slowly. I stepped out from the deep shadows, the aluminum bat held loosely in my hand, catching the faint glow of the distant streetlights, a stark silhouette against the night. "Jenkins!" My voice was low, guttural, unfamiliar even to my own ears. It tore through the still night. He took a step back, his head tilted slightly, trying to place me in the gloom. Then, as I moved further into the weak light, a flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by a swift, stark fear. His eyes widened, fixing on the bat in my hand. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I didn't speak. There was nothing more to say. I walked deliberately towards his BMW, past him. He stood frozen, watching me. The silence stretched. I raised the bat, the metal cold and heavy in my hands. The first swing connected with the passenger side headlight. The plastic shattered with a sharp crack, the glass scattering across the asphalt. I swung again, hitting the driver's side headlight. Another burst of light, another shower of shards. Then I turned to the windshield. The bat came down hard, a deafening crunch as the laminated glass spiderwebbed, then buckled inward. "What the hell?" Carl lunged, Finally finding his voice, a raw, desperate shout. He came at me, his briefcase dropping to the ground with a dull thud. I saw him coming, peripheral vision, but my focus was on the windshield. I swung the bat back, a wide, sweeping arc, catching him with a glancing blow to the shoulder. He cried out a sharp, surprised gasp and stumbled, losing his balance. His expensive shoes skidded on the asphalt, and he went down hard, landing on his side, dazed. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, shaking his head. I stood over him, the bat held high, poised. The raw anger, the cold fury that had been building for weeks, was a roaring fire inside me now. My breath came in ragged gasps. He looked up at me from the ground, his eyes wide, terrified, finally seeing me, finally understanding. I stood there for what felt like a long time, the weight of the bat a solid extension of my will. Then slowly I took a deep, shuddering breath. My grip loosened, the bat fell from my hand, clattering loudly on the asphalt. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. I turned and walked back to my truck, the adrenaline surging through me, making my hands shake, my legs feel unsteady. I got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot, leaving Carl sprawled on the ground, his wrecked BMW shimmering under the lonely security light. The drive home was a blur. The cold dread that had accompanied me all night now mixed with a strange, grim satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction I'd ever imagined, not a joyful one. More like the quiet click of a broken bone resetting itself, painful but necessary. The problem wasn't solved, not really, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I'd actually done something. I pulled the F-150 into our driveway just after 1 a.m. The house was dark, but a sliver of light showed under our bedroom door. Sarah was awake, I knew it. She was sitting up in bed, the lamp on her nightstand casting a soft glow on her face, making her look even paler than usual. Her eyes, wide and apprehensive, met mine as I walked in. She didn't have to ask, she just knew. I went to the office, I said, my voice hoarse, the words tasting like ash. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking beneath my weight. Carl's car, I broke the headlights and the windshield, and I hit him, just a glancing blow, but he went down. I left out the part about the bat being raised over him, the roar in my ears, the moment I almost lost control. Some things, even with Sarah, felt too dark to share. Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, silent and swift. "Oh, Frank," she whispered, a broken sound. "The police, what if they arrest you? What have you done?" Her voice was tight with fear, not for Carl, but for me. The weight of her fear, heavier than any dread of consequences, settled in my gut. The phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Detective Miller from the local precinct. "Mr. Peterson, we'd like you to come in for questioning regarding an incident at Paramount Properties last night." I told him I'd be there. Sarah watched me get dressed, her face still etched with worry. "Don't say anything more than you have to," she pleaded. At the station, the room was cold, sterile. I gave my statement, controlled, clipped. I admitted to being at the scene, to the damage to the car. I admitted to the confrontation, but I framed it around Carl's harassment of Sarah, making sure to highlight the text messages, the months of emotional distress. I kept the details of my rage out of it, focused on the facts, or at least my version of them. "He'd been tormenting my wife for months," I said, my voice level, threatening her job, making inappropriate advances. The text he sent last night was the final straw. To my surprise, Carl Jenkins was hesitant. Detective Miller informed me that Carl was only pressing charges for property damage, not assault. He wanted compensation for his wrecked BMW, nothing more. He hadn't mentioned the blow, or at least hadn't pressed it. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he wanted to keep things quiet. Either way, it was a small mercy. I was released pending investigation, facing a likely fine for vandalism, not jail time. Word, as it always does in small towns and contained corporate offices, spread like wildfire. The story of Carl Jenkins' smashed BIM and Frank Peterson, the quiet-eyed guy, being brought in for questioning, started to circulate at Paramount Properties. It was a hushed buzz at the water cooler, a knowing glance in the hallways. People started talking. And then a strange thing happened. Other employees, mostly women, emboldened by my actions, by the sudden spotlight on Carl, and by Sarah's months of detailed documentation started coming forward. They told their own stories of Carl's predatory behavior, the lingering touches, the veiled threats, the inappropriate comments that mirrored Sarah's own experiences. Sarah's black notebook, once a futile exercise, became a key piece of evidence. CEO Ed Peterson, a man usually more concerned with quarterly sales reports than office dynamics, a man who had protected Carl because his numbers were always high, was forced to act. The whispers turned into a roar. He had no choice but to launch a formal internal investigation. The investigation was swift and decisive. It uncovered a clear, undeniable pattern of misconduct, confirming everything Sarah and the others had claimed. Carl Jenkins was quietly fired, his career at Paramount Properties over. No public announcement, no fanfare. Just a discreet termination to avoid a messy, public scandal for the company. They wanted him gone, and they wanted it handled cleanly. Sarah was relieved, truly, deeply so. But she was also deeply shaken. She had been vindicated, yes, but the cost felt heavy. The ordeal had taken its toll, etched lines of worry around her eyes, left a fragility in her movements. Sometimes the choices we make for justice leave their own kind of wreckage. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The legal fallout was less severe than I had braced for. Carl Jenkins, perhaps eager to bury the entire affair, only pursued the property damage charges. I pleaded guilty, accepting the consequences. The judge, a stoic woman with tired eyes, listened to the prosecutor detail the vandalism, then listened to our lawyer, who quietly, factually, presented the timeline of Carl's harassment, Sarah's journal entries, and the internal investigation at Paramount. I was given a hefty fine enough to make us wince and ordered to complete 200 hours of community service at the local food bank. A suspended sentence hung over my head for 2 years. No jail time, a small win, purchased at a high price. The town, as small towns do, churned with gossip. At the grocery store, I'd catch people's eyes, some averting their gaze quickly, others holding it, a flicker of something, condemnation, curiosity, or even, sometimes, a quiet nod of approval. Some called me a reckless hothead. Others, fewer of them, whispered that a man had a right to protect his wife. It was a strange kind of notoriety, one I never wanted. Sarah took time off, a full 3 months. The company, perhaps feeling a measure of corporate guilt, paid her leave. She spent those weeks mostly at home, sometimes just sitting on the porch swing, staring at the street. The nightmares eventually lessened. Her laugh, a sound I hadn't realized I missed so much, slowly started to return. She was like a fractured vase, carefully pieced back together, the cracks still visible but holding firm. She read a lot, gardened, and slowly, painstakingly regained her confidence. When she was ready, she went back to real estate, but not to Paramount. She found a smaller firm across town, one known for its supportive, tight-knit environment. Her passion for the work was still there, but it was different now, tempered by experience, more grounded. She sold houses, yes, but she also looked at her clients with a deeper understanding, a quiet empathy for the lives unfolding behind every front door. Our marriage, which had felt like it was crumbling under the relentless pressure, somehow emerged stronger. We had been tested, pushed to our limits, seen the darkest sides of each other and of the world. The fire had burned away the veneer of our comfortable, predictable life, leaving behind something tougher, more resilient. We talked more, really talked, about everything, even the difficult things. There was a quiet understanding between us now, a bond forged in fear and shared struggle. We often talked about it late at night, in the quiet darkness of our bedroom. The moral ambiguities of it all. Had justice been served? Carl was gone, yes, but I had crossed a line, resorted to violence. Was that right? Was it worth it? There were no easy answers. We knew that now. Life wasn't a neat equation. The incident left scars, small, invisible marks that we carried, a heightened awareness of the darkness that could lurk beneath polite surfaces, a reminder of the choices we had made, the lengths we were willing to go for each other. It was a heavy weight, but also, in a strange way, a testament to our survival. Slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild our dreams. The colonial house with the big yard, the 2 kids we hoped for, maybe a golden retriever. Those dreams were still there, but they were different now. They were built on a foundation of hard-won knowledge, of a deeper understanding of life's complexities, its injustices, and the fierce, quiet strength it took to navigate them. I reflected on the price I had paid, the quiet man forced to violence. It wasn't who I wanted to be, but I knew I would do it again for Sarah. It was a bittersweet survival, this life we now led. Imperfect, yes, marred by the past, but ours. And as the sun rose each morning over the flat Midwestern horizon, we faced it together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. The suburban house felt quieter after all that. Not empty, but certainly changed. Sarah and I, we learned how to live with the lingering unease, the knowledge of what people were capable of, and what we ourselves had become capable of. The small town settled back into its rhythms, the gossip eventually fading like a distant siren. Some folks might still judge me, others might quietly approve, but their opinions no longer held the weight they once did. Sarah found her footing again, a new firmness in her step, a different kind of light in her eyes. Her passion for real estate, tempered by the fire she'd walked through, was a deeper, more resilient thing. We began to talk again about the colonial house, the kids we still hoped for. The dreams were still there, but they were built on a foundation that had cracked and been painstakingly repaired. We knew now that life wasn't always fair, and sometimes you had to make ugly choices to protect what mattered. The scars remained, a quiet reminder of the darkness and the choices we'd made to find our way back to the light. We stood on our porch sometimes, watching the sun set over the flat Midwestern horizon. Our life imperfect, but undeniably ours.